All right, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell. This is News and Views on November 26th. It's a Wednesday. I'm doing this a day early because for those of you overseas, tomorrow is a national holiday in the United States. It's Thanksgiving, our day that we eat turkey. So I decided to do this a day early because I'm taking tomorrow as kind of downtime. And there is an important story in the news. In fact, so many people emailed me this story that it absolutely had to be the subject of today's news and views. But first, I want to make a little announcement. For those of you who have not heard, my good friend and our colleague Georgianne Hughes has recently been diagnosed with severe forms of bone marrow cancer. So I want everybody to please keep her in your prayers. Please email her, go onto her website, use the contact information there. Send her your love and your prayers. She really needs them right now. She has been a huge, huge part of my life and of my success. She's been a huge part of the alternative news and research community for so many years, and she's done it all very quietly on her own. Uh, and she has been a huge contributor to this community. So please let her know. Send her some happy Thanksgiving wishes, and I want to extend mine to all of you in the United States celebrating Thanksgiving. Now, let's get to the news. There's big, huge news, and it had to happen sooner or later. And the news is coming out of France. And I'm going to link this article because it appeared in Zero Hedge, and so many of you caught this and sent it to me that this, and it truly is a significant story. The title of the article is Here Comes France. In other words, France is now just on the cusp of joining those nations that have called for the audit of their country's gold and a repatriation of all of France's gold reserves held outside of metropolitan France. All right. Now, this is interesting because this call is coming from the leader of the French Front National, Marie Le Pen. All right. Now, that's a right wing party. Many people think it's a fascist party, but in any case, I want you to listen to the Zero Hedge article that all this appears in. Because, first of all, the article notes that right now in France, in polling, in a runoff between Marie Le Pen and President Hollande, that Le Pen is leading Hollande. Now, this is huge news, folks. Now, let me read you part of Le Pen's letter. It's an open letter to Monsieur Christian Noyer of the French Central Bank. He is the governor. And Marie Le Pen says this: On behalf of the French, and in my capacity as the main opposition leader, I am writing to you because it is my duty to present a petition on the gold reserves of France under the best interests of our nation. Even before the outbreak of the 2008 crisis, the National Front had anticipated and informed the political institutions of the future worsening of the macroeconomic and geopolitical context. As part of the business model increasingly adopted by France under pressure from Brussels, no economic fundamentals may not be sustained for improvement. All, and by the way, this is a very poor translation, so I'm having to kind of guess at some of the English here. All French can see that the austerity policies demanded by the EU and the European Central Bank and implemented by the government are a proven failure and serious for our country. Now, please note the context of her remarks goes back to 2008. So, in other words, she's taking aim not only at President Hollande, but at his predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy. All right. The monetary institution you lead, in other words, the French central bank, has a historic mission to be the custodian of national central bank monetary reserves, including gold reserves. According to our strategic vision and sovereignty, they are neither the state nor the Bank of France, but the French people, and in addition serve as the ultimate guarantee of public debt and our currency. So in other words, kind of reading between the lines here, Le Pen is reminding the French central bank that ultimately, even a central bank, whether it's in their charter or not, is answerable to the people because they're issuing guarantees in the form of securities, bonds, sovereign securities, and money, banknotes, that they're using the people to guarantee. So in other words, she's asserting a claim of sovereignty over the French central bank. That's huge, folks. That's huge. And really the argument here, I think, I don't know all the ins and outs of how the French central bank was chartered. It was, I believe, founded by the Emperor Napoleon back in the year 1800 as kind of an answer or response to the Bank of England. But in any case, I think what Le Pen is getting at here is you cannot insist a central bank be independent and free of the people or sovereignty of the people that they represent and issue money in their name. That is a huge principle of law that has never been challenged in the United States vis-a-vis the Federal Reserve. Now, if I'm understanding her correctly here, and again, I'm relying on a very bad English translation. If I'm understanding her correctly here, then I want you to hear her next remarks. Excuse me, because I think these are, pardon me, that these are the most important remarks in her entire letter. Listen carefully. In a monetary Cold War played between the Western countries and the BRICS countries, gold gradually takes an important role. According to the World Gold Council, China's official gold reserves, India and Russia, have increased significantly between 2007 and 2013. For these reasons, and because of the rapid growth of global systemic risk, it is of utmost importance to the future solvency of our nation to engage by mid-2015 a detailed audit procedure, the results of which will be the subject of a report. This report must obtain validation of French macroprudential authorities, the ACPR, and will be made public in the year. This comprehensive audit should contain, listen carefully, a complete inventory of physical gold amounts to 2,435 tons currently displayed, and their quality, serial number, purity, bars, and whether they're good delivery or not, conducted by an independent French body to be defined. This inventory, under supervision of a bailiff, must indicate the country in which the gold reserves are stored, whether they be in France or abroad. A consensus of all formal financial employment agreement or secrets. Listen. A census of all formal financial employment agreements or secrets vis-a-vis private banks and corporations or bilateral loans between France and national and international institutions having pawned the gold of France to ensure the rescue of the euro. In this case, the comprehensive audit should contain the conditions of agreement or loans. Now, let's stop right there because this is so huge. This is an earthquake, folks. And if she succeeds in being elected president of France, it's going to send shockwaves because she will follow this policy. Let's go back and remember that the context of her remarks is a geopolitical monetary Cold War between the West and the BRICS nations. And by insisting that there be an audit of France's gold and that audit include an audit or exposure or transparency of all secret agreements between the French central bank and any international or private bank. In other words, she's saying, I want to know exactly what agreements have been made with the European Central Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, and anybody else, because we cannot have a solvent, stable financial system if there's no accountability and transparency. That's what she's saying. And in addition to this, the context that she has couched this in as a monetary Cold War between the West and the BRICS nations, what she's really signaling is that it is not in France's interest to continue to play the game that's coming out of the City of London, Wall Street, and Washington, D.C. So in other words, we had the concussion, we had the shock waves of Germany wanting their gold back. Now the Swiss are having a referendum where they want their gold back. The Dutch have been able to recover some of their gold, and now France may join them. Now, folks, this is a huge, huge thing because I've been warning about this. It's bad enough that we see Germany walking the political and economic tightrope between Brussels and Washington and London, and sending the signals that they're not going to be involved and will not be involved and are unable to be involved in any NATO emergency. That's huge. And now, recently in the last week, we've seen the German foreign minister, Herr Steinmeier, has said that the Ukraine cannot be admitted into the EU and it certainly won't be qualified for NATO membership. So in other words, Germany has pulled the plug on the American agenda for the Ukraine. Now France may, if the National Front gains a majority in the next French elections, the French may be joining this call for the repatriation of their gold. And we've got to remember something. This is coming at a time when France has been wavering on whether or not to sell those aircraft carriers to Russia. And as we're going to see in some of the upcoming blogs this next week, there's other bad news for France unless they get their game in order, and I don't see that France is going to be able to continue to go along with the economic sanctions against Russia. Now, at the end of her letter, this is how she summarizes her demands. Depending on the situation that we discover, I will urge you to do the following. Number one, urgent repatriation on French soil of all of our gold reserves located abroad. That right there says that the French National Front and the people in France that she represents do not trust the New York Federal Reserve to be a good and proper and transparent custodian of their gold reserves. We've seen what the experience of the Germans has been. We've been watching what's going on in Switzerland. We've seen the Dutch able to recover some of their gold, but now France may chime in. And if France chimes in, folks, that's Germany and France. That's the two most powerful economies and militaries in NATO in Western Europe. All right. So that's the problem here. She goes on to say an immediate discontinuation of any gold sales program. In other words, we're not going to sell anymore on the open market. Conversely, a gradual reallocation of a significant portion of foreign exchange reserves in the balance sheet of the Bank of France by buying gold at each significant decrease in the price of an ounce. So in other words, that's another huge earthquake, folks, because what that means is that if she was in power, she would not be going along with any attempt to suppress the price of gold. If anything, if there is this price suppression, she says we should be buying at that point. So that means that France is going to step out of the market manipulation that we've seen going on. A suspension of any financial commitment or loan contract would wager that our gold reserves and at the patrimonial and financial balance of the 2004 gold sales transactions ordered by Nicolas Sarkozy. And I think what she's getting at there is she wants an audit of whether or not even any of those programs were actually fulfilled. So huge news coming out of France, folks. That's it for my news and views. Let's watch this one closely. God bless everybody. And for everybody in the United States, please have a happy Thanksgiving. Travel safely, and we'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye, everybody.